So hey guys, I'm Jay. So my talk today examines creative nonfiction comics and how acts reflexivity help us to read. So I'm looking at two journals, which you guys just heard a bunch about, and Sacco's work, mainly journalism, but he's a comics journalist, so you can actually see very similar things in some of his other works. So this is supposed to be 600 DPI printed out, but here is the first panel on page 8 of two journals. And it says all of this is true. And it frames it as both creative nonfiction and brings into question what truth is within creative nonfiction comics. Now, Becky Bradway and Doug Hesse write in creative nonfiction that creative nonfiction makes no pretense of objectivity. The writer admits that she is coming from her own point of view. Writers want to bring readers into the world. Now, Scott Chandler's two journals, being creative nonfiction, means not only that it appears to tell true events, but also that in a way it reveals that it is a subjective work. Now this is a historical story, follows the lives of Chantler, the grandfather of the author, and Jack Chrysler as they train and fight in the Second World War as part of the Highland Light Infantry of Canada. Well, Scott does not introduce or bring himself into the work until its last few pages. The author subjectively affects and reveals how events are told to the reader. Sacco, on the other hand, is journalism. But it veers from the pretense of objectivity that standard print journalism promotes. He draws himself into the comics. And he states in the preface of the book Journalism that there will always exist, when presenting journalism in the comics form, Anyhow, there will exist, when presenting journalism in the comics form, a tension between those things that can be verified, like a quote, comment, tape, and those things that can defy verification, such as drawn purporting to represent a specific episode. So, I'm going to look at three subjective layers that work to build truth in creative nonfiction, which is source, author, and reader. Sources are necessary for all works of nonfiction because without being based on true events, a work is simply fiction. Any source created by a human is subjective, whether it's a video, photograph, written text, or any other medium. So, Sidney Dobrin and Christian Weiser echo this, writing, all reality, including nature, is discursively constructed. Chantler and Sacco construct the reality of the creative nonfiction story. Even with mediums outside of comics and text, like in photography, the photographer chooses what is within and not within a frame. In comics, the illustrator also chooses what and how to frame, as well as how reality is going to be depicted within the drawing. So, aside from people interviewed and documents read, sources can also be events witnessed by the work's author, which would appear objective when it happens. However, the source is viewed subjectively through the eyes of the author and thus becomes subjective as it transitions from the source layer to the author layer of subjectivity. Within creative nonfiction, even comics, the sources are usually revealed to the reader. In journalism, and in many of his other works, Sacco shows the process of himself interviewing people and experiencing events, which you can see here. He is talking to somebody, which then becomes the story that he is trying to tell. Usually, he gives an example of a story in journalism where he did not put himself in, and he talks about that, how in a sense it kind of detracts from the story in a sense. But it is important to realize this is not the actual source, but it is a representation of the source through the cartoonist's pen. But it shows the reader where the source comes from. It also shows the reader his reactions, which help the reader to give a clue as to how he would have subjectively interpreted being an event. Like here he is listening to this war crimes trial, and here he is kind of like hunkered down, almost looking like he's crying, like he's being mortified by it. Two journals, on the other hand, takes a different path to reveal how sources affected it. Paratext is a material that is published as part of a book, but is not the main text, the main story of the book. In the acknowledgments, Scott Chandler lists sources he primarily used on the first page, and these include like the 1943 diary of Chantler, which ended up becoming a lot of what created his book out. So these are all sources that came from another human being, either in the form of a written text or interview, meaning the story they tell is dependent on the subjective memory of their recollections, as well as subjective to how they tell their story. So, the acknowledgments section of the book also reveals sources that influence the writing process, but are not directly used towards the information within the book. In writing material, Nora Michi says, right under our noses, writers reveal the ordinary, and extraordinary forces that make writing possible. The expected nature of this mundane, overdetermined genre offers unexpected insights about writing. So, Chantler lists people such as Jennifer Lum, who has done an outstanding job with the design of this book, or Nancy Morey, who kept me company with good conversation on Thursday nights and after his mess, as both of us poured over the war diary. So these people did not actually contribute information to creating the book, but in a sense there were sources, influences that kind of affected how we would have written it or interpreted information as it happens. So, yeah. And so in Sacco's work, there isn't an acknowledgement section, but he commonly reveals his interview process in his work, as I showed you before. So the acknowledgement section isn't as essential to understand how the story is created. However, after each work, because journalism is a collection of several different works he has published in various magazines, he offers a note about the previous section, what happened with it. So after the first story he includes what's about some UN war crimes trials, he mentions that the last few panels of that section were weak because he was only able to interview the two important jurists as background information, and he could not actually have them on record. So he did this interview, and he wasn't able to draw it, but the information he gained from it helped him draw the other things. So without that being there, you would not have understood why does it just kind of fade out at the end, and why doesn't he have an important interview with one of these bigwigs. So, unless actively revealed to the reader, the layer of source can be invisible in creative nonfiction comics. The layer of subjectivity that reveals itself the most is that of the author. And the reasons for this is because comics in their nature are reflexive. Now, as Matthew Jones writes in his essay, Reflexivity in Comic Art, reflexivity will be conceptualized as a process by which the author of the text and / the audience of the text functions to call attention to the text as an artificial construct. And he further says, the key distinction here is that this definition places agency in the hands of the individuals, author, and audience, rather than the hands of a neutral artifact, the text. Reflexivity is not something that is located within the text itself, rather it is something that the author engages in while creating and the audience engages in while consuming. An individual audience member can experience reflexivity regardless of whether the author had any intention of that effect. End quote. So here is where reflexivity works to inform the reader that the creative nonfiction comic works to build truth instead of simply being truth. So between these two works, I found there were 5 types of reflexivity mentioned in this essay, but 4 finally come out within these 2 works, which is authorial awareness, demystification, intermediality, and intertextuality. So authorial awareness is the author's act of placing him or herself within the text, which instigates self-awareness by calling attention to the existence of the text, as I just said. So in 2 generals, this doesn't actually occur until the last few pages, page 132, in fact, where he says he and Marge had 3 sons who gave them 4 grandchildren. And here's a photo of the family that you can hardly see, and one of whom is the author of the books. He recognizes himself, the author, he mentions himself. So this is him actually bringing himself into this story. And here Chantler reveals himself as the author who's subjectively penned the book. He's telling the reader that he's actually has a relation to the person the story is about. Without that, the reader might not have known it. They might have seen Chantler on the front of the book and Chantler in the book and not put the 2 together, but here he's coming forward and actually saying that he has that family relationship. So Sacco, on the other hand, he's almost always drawing himself into the book and showing how things are affecting him. And he commonly uses the I voice too. So he's not just showing himself, but he's using the I. Like here he's narrating, the longer I'm in the hub, the more I'm being sucked into the courts or later deconstruction of some recent histories, phallic moments. And here he is saying he's also fascinated and stupefied, so showing how he subjectively feels about what he is writing about. So both cartoonists also use demystification, which is the act of revealing the mechanisms of production responsible for creating the particular text, which is as Jones describes it. So here is Sacco, and he shows himself interviewing people and processing the events. Though this isn't the act of cartooning, or simply the tools being used to cartoon, he's showing how he gathers the information that creates the narrative by embedding the process of journalism within his work. Chantler, on the other hand, near the end of the book, page 132, the same page we saw the other thing, he shows his tools of creation. You see a pen there, a brush there. Actually, I've watched Scott work before, and he does just quote everything with a brush and ink. And you can see that. You can see the little dab of ink there. And here is actually a photograph that is representative of an actual photograph that exists outside of the book. But this photograph, it also appears earlier on within the book itself. So it creates kind of an anthropological connection between those. So, as I was just saying, this creates an anthropological connection. On page 33, there is the act of this being a photo being taken and this photo being shown. So, yeah. And this is what Theodore Goldstein calls an anthropological connection, which is a translinear or distillation. And it's important to realize that the author cannot include his or her body within the text. As Jones says, whenever a text seeks to demystify, it will always offer another mystification in place of the first. So if you're going to go back to understanding comics, sorry. So Scott McCloud kind of brings this up with his the trajectory of images and his drawing of it, and refers to the trajectory of images, his rendition of it, of being not actually a pipe or a drawing of a pipe, it's actually a printed copy of a drawing of a pipe. So it's a representation, or a print of a representation of something. So, yeah. And so the fourth type of reflexivity we're looking at is intermediate. We're doing time. Okay. So intermediality, which is the medium of representation is itself represented through another medium, thus calling attention to the particular features of each medium. So here, I've actually gone to Joe Sacco's work Palestine because I didn't find photography really being used in journalism. But here he is going about, he's somewhere in Gaza, going about a hospital. Both people have been injured by, being shot or whatever, and he's taking photographs of something. So here are two photos being taken, and little triangles indicate that. But they're drawn in the same format as the rest of his comics. And here he's being refused to be able to take a photograph, but he still draws it anyways. So this shows that both photography and comics are both subjective, they're both pen, in the sense, framed. And to him, the photography is mainly just a device of memory to help him do his comicking. But at the same time, it shows the limitations of something like photography, because he cannot take a photo there, but he's still able to pen. And again, here showing photography, the act of it, the framing of it, side by side with comics here, shows the fact that both of them deal with framing, both of them deal with subjectively dealing with how you perceive something. So I'm gonna wrap up, just we have a few minutes for questions here.
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes.
Yeah. So thank you. And you guys want to get up here?
Yeah.